Hello and welcome. Tonight, we step gently into one of the most enchanting fairy tales ever told. There's nothing you need to do right now. Just settle in, breathe a little slower, and let the day drift away. If this space brings you comfort, you're always welcome to stay by liking the video or subscribing, but only if it truly feels right to you. I love knowing where these stories travel, so if you wish, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time the night has reached for you. Now lower the lights, let a soft sound fill the room, and allow yourself to be carried slowly, calmly into tonight's story. Cat and Mouse in Partnership. A cat had made the acquaintance of a mouse, and he spoke to her so gently and so often of the great love and friendship that he felt for her that at last the mouse was touched by his words. She had never before heard such friendly speech from a creature so much stronger than herself, and she thought that such kindness must surely be sincere. Thus it came to pass that she agreed they should live together and keep house in common, sharing both their labor and their food. "But we must make preparations for winter," said the cat one day, speaking with the tone of one who knows the world well. "Otherwise, we shall suffer from hunger, and you little mouse cannot venture out everywhere, for in the end you would surely be caught in a trap." The mouse praised this advice as wise and sensible and followed it without hesitation, for she trusted the cat's experience more than her own. Together, they bought a pot of fat, which they intended to save against the cold season. But when they had brought it home, they did not know where it would be safest to store it. They thought of many places, but each seemed to have its danger. At last, the cat said, after much consideration, "I know of no place where it would be better stored than in the church. No one dares take anything away from there. We will place it beneath the altar and not touch it until the time of need." The mouse found this suggestion excellent, and so the pot was carried to the church and set safely in its place. For a little while, both were content. Yet it was not long before the cat felt a strong longing for the fat, and the thought of it would not leave him in peace. One day he said to the mouse, "I wanted to tell you something, little mouse. My cousin has brought a little son into the world, and she has asked me to be his godfather. He is white with brown spots, and I am to hold him over the baptismal font. Let me go out today, and you can look after the house by yourself." "Yes, yes," answered the mouse, "by all means go, and if you get anything good to eat, think of me. I would like to drink a drop of sweet red christening wine myself." She spoke with cheerful innocence, never doubting the truth of his words. But all this was untrue. The cat had no cousin, and he had not been asked to be godfather. He went straight to the church, crept softly to the place where the pot of fat stood hidden, and began to lick it. Slowly and carefully, he licked off the top layer, tasting it with great satisfaction. When he had eaten his fill, he left the church, wandered along the roofs of the town, and lay down in the warm sun. From time to time, he licked his whiskers, smiling to himself whenever he thought of the fat he had enjoyed. Not until evening did he return home. "Well, here you are again," said the mouse. "You must have had a happy day." "Everything went well," answered the cat calmly. "What name did they give the child?" asked the mouse. "Top off," said the cat without the slightest embarrassment. "Top off!" cried the mouse. "That is a very odd and uncommon name. Is it a usual one in your family?" "What does that matter?" said the cat. "It is no worse than Crumb Thief, as your godchildren are called." Before long, the cat was seized by another fit of longing stronger than the first. Again, he said to the mouse, "You must do me a favor and once more manage the house alone for a day. I have been asked again to be godfather, and since the child has a white ring around its neck, I cannot refuse." The good mouse consented at once, for the request now seemed familiar. Once again the cat crept away past behind the town wall and went straight to the church. This time he devoured half of the pot of fat. "Nothing tastes as good as that which one eats by oneself," he said, as he licked the last traces from his mouth and felt well satisfied with his day's work. When he came home, the mouse asked, as before, what name was this child christened with? "Half Gone," answered the cat. "Half Gone," said the mouse slowly. "What are you saying? I have never heard that name in all my life. I'll wager it is not in the almanac." Yet she said no more and let the matter rest. Soon the cat's mouth again began to water for the delicious fat. "All good things come in threes," he said to the mouse. "I have been asked to be godfather again. The child is totally black, only it has white paws. Otherwise, it has not a single white hair on its whole body. This happens only once every few years. You will let me go, won't you?" "Top off, Half Gone," answered the mouse. "They are such odd names that they make me stop and think." "Here you sit at home," said the cat sharply, "with your dark gray fur coat and long braid of hair capturing foolish thoughts. That is because you do not go out in the daytime." During the cat's absence, the mouse cleaned the house and put everything in order, wishing to be useful. Meanwhile, the greedy cat devoured all that was left of the fat. One has peace only after everything is eaten up. He said to himself. Full and heavy, he did not return home until night had fallen. The mouse immediately asked what name had been given to the third child. "You will not like it either," said the cat. "His name is All Gone." "All Gone," cried the mouse. "That is the most worrisome name of all. I have never seen it in print. All Gone. What can that mean?" She shook her head, curled herself up, and lay down to sleep, though uneasy thoughts followed her into her dreams. From this time forth, no one invited the cat to be godfather. When winter came, and there was nothing more to be found outside, the mouse remembered their stored food. "Come, cat," she said, "we will go to our pot of fat that we have stored up for ourselves. It will taste good now." "Yes," answered the cat. "You will enjoy it as much as you would enjoy sticking that dainty tongue of yours out of the window." They set out together, but when they arrived, the pot of fat was still in its place, only it was empty. "Alas," said the mouse, "now I see what has happened. Now it comes to light. You are a true friend. You ate everything when you were serving as a godfather. First, top off, then half gone. Then, be quiet," cried the cat. "One more word, and I will eat you too." All Gone was already on the poor mouse's lips. She had scarcely spoken it before the cat sprang upon her, seized her, and swallowed her down. You see, that is the way of the world. Hansel and Gretel. Near a great forest, there lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy was called Hansel, and the girl was named Gretel. Their house stood close to the edge of the trees, where the tall trunks darkened the light even at midday, and where the wind often carried the low, whispering sounds of the forest into their home. The family had little to eat and little to hope for. Bread was scarce, and many days passed when hunger sat with them at the table like an uninvited guest. In times when the land yielded poorly and work could not be found, the woodcutter struggled even to earn their daily bread. Each morning he went out with his axe, yet returned at night with empty hands and a heavy heart. The children grew thin, and their clothes hung loosely upon them. Gretel often tried to quiet her hunger by drinking water, while Hansel learned to endure it in silence. The house itself seemed to grow colder, as if want and fear had crept into its walls. One night, as the woodcutter lay awake upon his bed, he turned from side to side, unable to sleep. His thoughts weighed upon him more heavily than the darkness. At last, he sighed deeply and said to his wife, "What will become of us? We cannot even feed our children. There is nothing left for ourselves." His wife, who lay beside him, answered without hesitation. Her voice was sharp and resolute, as though the matter had already been decided in her mind. "I will tell you what we must do. Early tomorrow morning, we will take the children into the forest, where it is thickest. We will make them a fire and give each of them a piece of bread. Then we will go to our work and leave them there alone. They will never find the way home again, and we shall be free of them." The man started at her words and turned toward her in alarm. "No, wife," he said, "I cannot do that. I cannot find it in my heart to take my own children into the forest and leave them there alone. The wild beasts would soon come and devour them." "You fool," she replied harshly. "Then we shall all four starve. You may as well begin making coffins for us. This is the only way." And she scolded and reproached him without pause, until at last, worn down by fear and weakness, he gave his consent. "Yet even then," he said softly, "I truly pity the poor children." The two children had not been able to sleep that night for hunger, and so they heard every word their stepmother spoke. Gretel trembled and began to weep bitterly. "It is all over with us," she whispered. "Be quiet." Gretel said Hansel, though his own heart beat quickly, "Do not fret. I will find a way to help us." When the parents had at last fallen asleep, Hansel rose quietly from his bed. He put on his little coat, opened the back door, and slipped outside. The moon shone brightly in the clear sky, and the white flints that lay scattered before the house glittered like pieces of silver. Hansel stooped down again and again, filling his pockets with as many of the shining stones as they would hold. Then he returned indoors, comforted his sister, and said, "God will not forsake us." With that, he lay down and slept. At dawn, before the sun had risen, the wife awakened the children. "Get up, you lazy bones," she said. "We are going into the forest to cut wood." She gave each of them a piece of bread and added, "That is for your dinner. Do not eat it before then, for you will get no more." Gretel placed her bread under her apron, but Hansel could not do so, for his pockets were full of flints. Then all four set off toward the forest. As they walked, Hansel lingered behind, stopping again and again to look back toward the house. At last, His father said, "Hansel, what are you looking at? Take care not to forget your legs." "Oh, father," answered Hansel, "I am looking at my little white kitten sitting on the roof, bidding me goodbye." "You foolish child," said the woman, "that is not your kitten, but the sunshine shining on the chimney." But Hansel had not been looking at any kitten. Each time he stopped, he had taken a flint from his pocket and dropped it upon the path. Thus, little by little, he marked the way behind them. When they reached the heart of the forest, the father told the children to gather wood for a fire to keep them warm. Hansel and Gretel collected brushwood until it formed a small heap, and it was set alight. When the flames rose high, the wife said, "Now lie down by the fire and rest yourselves. We will go into the forest to cut wood, and when we are finished, we will come back and fetch you." So the children sat by the fire. At midday they ate their pieces of bread and waited. They believed they heard their father's axe striking wood in the distance, and this comforted them, though it was only a dry branch moved by the wind. At last, weariness overcame them, and they fell asleep. When they awoke, night had fallen. The forest lay dark and silent around them, and Gretel began to cry in fear. "How shall we ever find our way out of this wood?" "Wait a little while," said Hansel. "When the moon rises, we shall see the path again." Soon the full moon climbed into the sky, and its light fell upon the stones Hansel had dropped, shining like silver threads through the darkness. Taking his sister by the hand, he followed them steadily. All night they walked, and by morning they reached their father's house. When they knocked at the door and the wife opened it, she scolded them, saying, "Why did you sleep so long in the forest? We thought you would never come home again." But the father rejoiced, for it had troubled his heart greatly to leave his children alone. Not long afterward, however, there came another time of great scarcity. Once more there was little food in the house, and the children heard their stepmother speaking at night. "Everything is finished," she said. "We have only half a loaf left. The children must go. This time we will take them deeper into the forest so that they cannot find the way back." The man felt sorrow in his heart and thought it would be better to share his last morsel with his children. But his wife would not listen, and as before, he gave in. The children were awake and heard it all. That night, Hansel tried to go out and gather flints again, but the door was locked and he could not. He comforted Gretel as best he could and said, "God will help us." Early the next morning, the wife led them once more into the forest. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, the woodcutter's wife came and pulled the children from their beds. She gave each of them a small piece of bread, much smaller than before, and told them it must last them until evening. Gretel slipped hers beneath her apron, but Hansel, who had learned caution through bitter experience, broke his bread into crumbs and hid them in his pocket. They set out once more toward the forest. The path seemed familiar at first, yet Hansel lagged behind, stopping again and again. Each time he let a few crumbs fall from his hand onto the ground. His father noticed and said, "Hansel, why do you keep stopping and looking back? I am looking at my little pigeon sitting on the roof, bidding me farewell," answered Hansel. "You foolish child," said the woman sharply. "That is no pigeon. It is the morning sun shining upon the chimney pots." Hansel said no more, but continued quietly scattering his crumbs along the way. Soon the houses thinned, the trees grew closer together, and the forest swallowed them once again. This time, the woman led them far deeper than before to a place where the trees stood so thickly that little light could pass between them. The air felt heavy, and even the birds seemed fewer. As before, a fire was made larger than the first, and the woman said, "Sit here, you children, and rest yourselves. When you grow tired, you may sleep. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and when we are finished, we will return for you." Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire and watched their parents walk away. The sound of their footsteps faded quickly, swallowed by the stillness of the forest. When noon came, Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, for he had scattered all of his along the path. They ate slowly, trying to make the small pieces last, and then they waited. The hours passed, and no one came. The fire burned low, and the forest around them seemed to grow larger and more silent. At last, overcome by weariness, they lay down and fell asleep. When they awoke, darkness had already fallen. The fire was nothing but glowing embers, and the trees stood like black pillars all around them. "Wait," said Hansel gently, as Gretel began to tremble. "When the moon rises, we shall see the crumbs and find our way home." They waited until the moon climbed into the sky, shining pale and cold through the branches. Then they rose and began to search for the trail. But they could find no crumbs. The birds of the forest and the fields had come and eaten them all. Not a single piece remained to guide their steps. Hansel tried to hide his fear and took his sister by the hand. They walked on, hoping the path would become familiar, but each turn led only to more trees. They wandered the whole night, and when morning came, they were still lost. All that day, they walked again from morning until evening, but they found no way out of the forest. Hunger gnawed at them, and they had nothing to eat but a few berries they found among the bushes. By the time night came again, they were so weary that their legs could scarcely carry them. At last, they lay down beneath a great tree and fell into a deep sleep. It was now the third morning since they had left their father's house. Though they tried again and again to find the right path, each step seemed only to lead them farther from home. Had help not come soon, they would surely have perished. About midday, they saw a pretty snow-white bird sitting upon a branch. It sang so sweetly that the children stopped to listen. When its song was finished, the bird spread its wings and flew a little way ahead of them. The children followed, for they had nothing else to guide them. Again and again, the bird flew on, resting briefly before moving farther, and Hansel and Gretel followed until at last they came upon a little house. The bird perched upon the roof, and there it remained. When the children drew closer, they saw that the house was built of bread and roofed with cakes. The windows were made of clear sugar shining softly in the light. Hunger overcame all caution. "We will eat some of this," said Hansel. "I will take a piece of the roof, and you may have some of the window. That will taste sweet." Hansel reached up and broke off a small piece of the roof, while Gretel stood by the window and gnawed at it. As they ate, a thin voice called from within the house, "Nibble, nibble like a mouse. Who is nibbling at my house?" The children answered together, It is the wind so mild and thin that blows without and whistles in. And they went on eating, thinking no more of it. Hansel found the roof so good that he broke off a larger piece, and Gretel pulled out a whole round window pane and sat down to eat it at her ease. Suddenly the door opened, and an old woman came out leaning upon a crutch. Hansel and Gretel were frightened and let fall what they had in their hands. But the old woman nodded kindly and said, "Ah, my dear children, how did you come here? Come inside with me. You shall be well taken care of." She took them by the hand and led them into her little house. There they found a fine meal, laid out milk and pancakes, sugar apples, and nuts. Afterward, she showed them 2 little white beds. Hansel and Gretel lay down upon them, thinking they were in heaven. But the old woman was a wicked witch. She had built a house of bread to lure children inside, and when they were in her power, she killed them, cooked them, and ate them. Her eyes were red and weak, and she could not see far, but she had a keen sense of smell and knew at once when human beings were near. When she saw Hansel and Gretel approach her house, she laughed quietly to herself and said, "They are mine, and they shall not escape me." Early the next morning, before the children were awake, the witch rose and looked at them as they slept. Their cheeks were round and rosy from the good food. "What a fine feast I shall have," she muttered. She seized Hansel with her withered hand and led him outside to a little stable. There she shut him behind a grating, and though he cried and screamed, it was of no use. Then she went back to Gretel and shook her roughly. "Get up, lazy bones," she cried. "Fetch water and cook something good for your brother. He is to be fattened, and when he is fat enough, I shall eat him." Gretel wept bitterly, but she had to do as she was told. Each day the witch cooked the best food for Hansel, while Gretel was given nothing but crab shells. Every morning the witch went to the stable and cried, "Hansel, stretch out your finger so that I may see whether you are fat enough." Hansel, who was clever, stretched out a small bone instead. The witch, whose eyes were weak, could not see clearly and believed it to be his finger. She wondered greatly that he did not grow fatter. Thus many days passed, and Hansel remained thin. At last the witch grew impatient and said, "Be he fat or be he lean, tomorrow I shall kill and cook him." When Gretel heard the witch's words, her heart sank within her. She went out to fetch water, and as she did so, tears streamed down her cheeks. "Dear God," she cried softly, "pray help us. If we had been devoured by wild beasts in the forest, at least we should have died together." "Spare me your lamentations," said the old woman harshly when she heard her. "They will do you no good." Early the next morning, before the sun had risen, Gretel was forced to rise and light the fire. The witch filled the kettle with water and said, "First we shall bake. I have heated the oven already and kneaded the dough." She pushed Gretel toward the oven, from which the flames were already leaping and roaring. "Creep inside," said the witch, "and see whether it is hot enough so that the bread may be baked." But Gretel understood at once what the witch intended. She stood still and said, "I do not know how to do it. How shall I get in?" "Stupid goose," cried the witch, "the opening is big enough. Look, I could get in myself." And she stooped down and thrust her head into the oven. In that moment, Gretel gathered all her strength and courage. She gave the witch a sudden push so that she fell farther inside. Then Gretel slammed the iron door shut and fastened the bar. Oh, how frightfully the witch howled. But Gretel ran away and left her to burn miserably. She did not stop until she reached the stable. There she opened the door and cried, "Hansel, we are free. The wicked witch is dead." Hansel sprang out like a bird released from its cage. How they rejoiced! They threw their arms around each other's necks, danced about, and kissed one another in their joy. All fear had left them now. They went back into the witch's house and searched it from end to end. In every corner stood chests filled with pearls and precious stones. "These are better than flint stones," said Hansel as he filled his pockets. Gretel also filled her apron, thinking she would like to take something home with her. "Now we must go," said Hansel. "If only we can find our way out of the witch's forest." They set out and walked for several hours. At last, they came to a great stretch of water. It lay broad and dark before them, and no bridge or stepping stones could be seen. "We cannot cross this," said Hansel. "There is no path and no bridge." "And there is no boat either," said Gretel. "But look, here comes a white duck. If I ask her, perhaps she will help us." She called out, "Duck, duck, here we stand, Hansel and Gretel on the land. No bridge nor stone can we find carry us over, be good and kind." The duck came swimming toward them. Hansel climbed onto her back and said, "Sister, come too." "No," answered Gretel. "That would be too heavy for her. We must go one at a time." And so it was done. The duck carried Hansel across first, then returned and carried Gretel. When both were safely on the other side, the duck swam away, and they went on their journey. As they walked, the forest began to change. The trees grew more familiar, and the path beneath their feet seemed known to them. With every step, their hearts grew lighter, and at last they saw their father's house standing in the distance. They ran as fast as they could, rushed through the door, and threw themselves upon their father's neck. The poor man had not known a moment's peace since he had left his children in the forest, but now his sorrow was turned to joy. The wife was no longer living, and there was no one left to trouble them. When Gretel opened her apron, the pearls and precious stones spilled out across the floor. Hansel reached into his pockets and drew out handful after handful of treasure. From that day on, all care was at an end. They lived together in great happiness, and never again did hunger trouble them. My tale is done. There runs a mouse. Whoever catches it may make himself a fine fur cap out of it. Our Lady's Child. Hard by a great forest, there dwelt a poor woodcutter with his wife. They had but one child, a little girl of 3 years old, and she was all the joy that remained to them. Yet joy alone could not still hunger. Their poverty had grown so bitter that they no longer possessed daily bread, and often they looked upon the child with anxious hearts, not knowing how they should keep her alive. Each morning brought the same uncertainty, and each evening the same fear for the morrow. One day the woodcutter went sorrowfully into the forest to pursue his labor. His hands worked as they always had, but his thoughts were heavy, and the sound of the axe fell upon his heart like a dull echo of despair. As he stood there cutting wood, a tall and beautiful woman suddenly appeared before him. A crown of shining stars rested upon her head, and her countenance was mild and grave. She spoke to him and said, I am the Virgin Mary, mother of the child Jesus. Thou art poor and needy. Bring thy child to me. I will take her with me, be her mother, and care for her." The man trembled, for he felt that he stood before something greater than himself. Fear and hope struggled within him. To give away his only child was pain beyond measure, yet to refuse seemed impossible. He bowed his head, and in silent obedience he did as he was commanded. He brought his little daughter and placed her in the arms of the Virgin Mary, and she took the child with her up to heaven. There the child fared well. She ate sugar cakes and drank sweet milk, and her clothes were of gold. The little angels played with her, and she knew neither want nor sorrow. Her days passed in peace, and she grew beneath a gentle protection that sheltered her from all harm. Nothing was demanded of her, and nothing forbidden, save what she was told in kindness. Thus the years went by, and when she was 14 years of age, the Virgin Mary called her one day and said, "Dear child, I am about to make a long journey. Take into thy keeping the keys of the 13 doors of heaven. 12 of these thou mayest open and behold the glory within them, but the 13th, to which this little key belongs, is forbidden thee. Beware of opening it, or thou wilt bring misery upon thyself." The maiden promised to be obedient, and when the Virgin Mary was gone, she began to examine the dwellings of the kingdom of heaven. Each day she opened one door, and each day she beheld wonders greater than she had seen before. In every chamber sat one of the apostles, surrounded by a great and shining light. The splendor rejoiced her heart, and the angels who accompanied her rejoiced with her. All was order, all was brightness, and all was permitted. At last, only the forbidden door remained. Then a strange uneasiness stirred within her. She had obeyed without effort until now, but her heart was no longer that of a child. A desire awoke in her which she could not easily quiet. She wondered what might be hidden behind that door which was not meant for her eyes. The angels warned her, saying, "Oh no, that would be a sin. The Virgin Mary has forbidden it, and it may bring thee unhappiness." She was silent and withdrew, yet the desire did not leave her. It gnawed within her and gave her no rest. One day, when the angels had all gone out, she said to herself, "Now I am quite alone, and no one will ever know. I will not enter, I will only see a little." She sought out the key, and when she had it in her hand, she put it into the lock and turned it. The door sprang open, and there she saw the Trinity, sitting in fire and splendor. She stood still in amazement, gazing upon what no mortal eye should see. Then she touched the light with her finger, and her finger became golden. Immediately, a great fear fell upon her. She shut the door violently and fled away. Yet her terror would not leave her. Her heart beat continually, and the gold upon her finger would not go away no matter how she rubbed or washed it. Not long after this, the Virgin Mary returned from her journey. She called the maiden before her and asked for the keys of heaven. When she received them, she looked into the girl's eyes and said, "Hast thou not opened the 13th door also?" "No," replied the maiden, Then the Virgin laid her hand upon the girl's heart and felt how it beat and beat. She asked again, "Art thou certain that thou hast not done it?" "Yes," said the girl. For the third time the Virgin questioned her, and when she saw the golden finger, she knew the truth. "Thou hast not obeyed me," she said, "and besides that thou hast lied, thou art no longer worthy to be in heaven." The maiden fell into a deep sleep, and when she awoke, she lay upon the earth below, in the midst of a wilderness. She wished to cry out, but no sound came from her mouth. She tried to flee, yet thick hedges of thorns held her fast on every side. In the desert stood an old hollow tree, and this became her dwelling. There she crept at night, and there she slept. Her life was full of misery. Roots and wild berries were her food, and she wandered far to find them. In autumn she gathered fallen nuts and leaves, and in winter she crept among the leaves to keep from freezing. Her clothes fell from her in rags, and when the sun shone again, her long hair covered her like a mantle. Year after year passed thus, and she felt the pain and sorrow of the world, remembering how happy she had once been in heaven. One day, when the trees were once more clothed in fresh green, the king of the country was hunting in the forest. He followed a road that fled ever deeper into the thicket, until at last it ran into a part of the wood so closely overgrown that neither horse nor hound could pass. The king dismounted, cut himself a path with his sword, and forced his way through the tangled branches. When he had at last broken through, he saw a maiden sitting beneath an old hollow tree. She was of wondrous beauty, and her long golden hair fell about her and covered her down to her very feet like a mantle. The king stood still in astonishment and gazed upon her for a long while. Then he spoke and said, "Who art thou? Why dost thou sit here alone in the wilderness?" But she gave him no answer, for she could not open her mouth. Her silence did not arise from fear, but from the fate that lay upon her. The king spoke again more gently and asked whether she would go with him to his castle. She did not speak yet. She nodded her head a little, as though she accepted what was offered without resistance. The king lifted her in his arms and carried her to his horse, and thus he brought her home to his royal castle. There she was clothed in beautiful garments and provided with all things in abundance. Although she could not speak, her beauty and gentleness were such that the king loved her with all his heart. She bore herself quietly and modestly, and her silence was like a veil that hid her sorrow from all eyes. Before long, the king made her his wife, and she became queen of the land. After a year had passed, the queen brought a son into the world. In the night, when she lay alone upon her bed, the Virgin Mary appeared to her and said, "If thou wilt tell the truth and confess that thou didst unlock the forbidden door, I will open thy mouth and give thee back thy speech. But if thou persistest in thy sin and deniest it, I will take thy newborn child away with me." Then the queen was permitted to answer, and she spoke, yet her heart was still bound by pride and fear. She said, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." Thereupon the Virgin Mary took the child from her arms and vanished with it. When morning came and the child could not be found, a whisper went through the palace, and soon the whisper became a rumor. The people said that the queen was a man-eater and had destroyed her own child. She heard these words, yet she could not defend herself, and no sound rose to deny the accusation. The king, however, would not believe it, for his love was stronger than all suspicion. After another year, the queen bore a second son. Again, in the night, the Virgin Mary came to her and spoke the same words as before. Once more the queen was offered mercy in exchange for confession. And once more she said, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." Then the Virgin Mary took away the child and returned to heaven. When morning dawned and the second child was gone, the people cried out more loudly than before. The rumor hardened into certainty, and the counselors of the king demanded that the queen should be brought to justice. But the king loved her dearly and would not hear of it. He forbade them, under pain of death, to speak further of the matter. In the third year, the queen gave birth to a beautiful little daughter, and for the third time the Virgin Mary appeared to her in the night. She took the queen by the hand and led her to heaven, and there she showed her the two little sons who smiled and played with the ball of the world. When the queen saw them, her heart was moved, and joy and longing rose within her. Then the Virgin Mary said, "Is thy heart not yet softened? If thou wilt confess that thou didst open the forbidden door, I will give thee back thy two sons." But the queen's pride had grown strong through long silence. For the third time she answered, "No, I did not open the forbidden door." Then the Virgin Mary let her sink back to earth and took from her the third child also. When the loss of the child was made known, the people cried aloud, "The queen is a man-eater, she must be judged." And the king was no longer able to restrain his counselors. A trial was held, and as the queen could neither answer nor defend herself, she was condemned to be burnt alive. The wood was gathered, and the queen was bound fast to the stake. As the flames began to rise around her, and the fire crept nearer, the hardness of her heart melted away. The pride that had held her silent for so long gave way before the nearness of death. Then she thought, "If I could but confess before my end that I opened the forbidden door." At that moment her voice returned to her, and she cried out loudly, "Yes, Mary, I did it." Straightway rain fell from the sky and extinguished the flames, and a bright light shone down from above. The Virgin Mary descended from heaven with the two little sons by her side and the newborn daughter in her arms. She spoke kindly to the queen and said, "He who repents his sin and acknowledges it is forgiven." Then she gave her back the three children, untied her tongue, and granted her happiness for the rest of her life. And the queen lived henceforth in peace, mindful of her fall and her redemption, and the order that had once been broken was restored. Rapunzel. There once lived a man and his wife who had long wished for a child, but all their hopes had come to nothing. Day after day passed, and year followed year, yet their house remained empty of the sound of a child's voice. Though they did not speak much of their sorrow, it lay quietly between them, and often returned when least expected. At the back of their house there was a little window which looked into a beautiful garden filled with the finest flowers and vegetables. Everything grew there in great abundance and order, as though tended by an unseen hand. But a high wall surrounded the garden on all sides, and no one dared to enter it, for it belonged to a witch of great might, and of whom all the world was afraid. One day the wife was standing at the window gazing into the garden as she had often done before. Her eyes fell upon a bed of rampion that looked so fresh and green that it shone among the other plants. As she looked at it, a strong desire awakened within her. At first, she only thought how fair it appeared, but soon she wished for some of it, and before long she longed for it greatly. This longing did not pass away. Each day it grew stronger, and as she knew that she could not get the rampion, she pined away. Her cheeks lost their color, her strength failed, and she grew pale and miserable. She could neither eat nor sleep in peace, and the thought of the rampion filled her mind both day and night. The man saw that his wife was wasting away and became uneasy. At last he asked her, "What is the matter, dear wife?" "Oh," answered she, "I shall die unless I can have some of that rampion to eat, which grows in the garden at the back of our house." The man loved her very much, and when he heard these words, he was greatly distressed. He thought to himself, "Rather than lose my wife, I will get her some rampion, cost what it will." And so, when twilight came, he climbed over the high wall into the witch's garden. He plucked hastily a handful of rampion for his heartbeat, fast with fear, and brought it home to his wife. She made a salad of it at once and ate it eagerly, and it tasted so good to her that she felt comforted for a while. But the very next day her longing returned stronger than before, and she said that if she were to have any rest, the man must climb over the wall again. Though he was afraid, his love for his wife was greater than his fear. Once more he went into the garden at the twilight, but as he was climbing back over the wall, he saw all at once the witch standing before him. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she cried in a terrible voice, "How dare you climb into my garden like a thief and steal my rampion? It shall be the worse for you." "Oh," answered he, trembling, "be merciful rather than just. I have only done this through necessity. My wife saw your rampion from the window and became possessed with so great a longing that she would have died if she could not have had some to eat." The witch looked at him for a moment and then said, "If all is as you say, you may have as much rampion as you like on one condition: the child that will come into the world must be given to me. It shall go well with the child, and I will care for it like a mother." The man was in great distress of mind, but his fear and his love overcame all other thoughts, and he promised everything. When the time came and the child was born, the witch appeared at once. She gave the child the name of Rapunzel, which is the same as rampion, and then she took the little girl away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child in the world. Her eyes were clear, her face bright, and her hair shone like gold in the sunlight. When she was 12 years old, the witch shut her up in a tower that stood in the midst of a great wood. The tower had neither steps nor door, but only a small window high above the ground. Whenever the witch wished to enter, she stood below and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel had long, beautiful hair that shone like fine gold. When she heard the voice of the witch, she would undo the fastening of the window, unbind the plaits of her hair, and let them fall 20 ells below. Then the witch would climb up by the hair and go into her. Thus Rapunzel lived alone in the tower, seeing little of the world and knowing nothing beyond the forest that surrounded her. She passed her days in quiet and often sang to herself to pass away the time, for she knew no other way to ease her loneliness. After they had lived thus for several years, it happened that the king's son once rode through the wood in which the tower stood. As he drew near, he heard a voice singing so sweetly that he reined in his horse and stood still to listen. The song rose gently through the air, clear and sorrowful, and seemed to come from no living creature of this world. It was Rapunzel who, in her loneliness, sang to pass away the time. The king's son looked about him and sought to find the singer, but though he rode around the tower, he could discover no door by which to enter it. At last, he was forced to turn back, yet the song had entered into his heart so deeply that he could think of nothing else. From that day on, he returned again and again to the wood and always stood beneath the tower, listening. Once, as he was standing there beneath a tree, he saw the witch come riding toward the tower. She halted below it and cried aloud, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then the king's son saw Rapunzel let down her long tresses, and he saw how the witch climbed up by them and went in to her. And he said to himself, "If that is the ladder, I too will climb it and seek my fortune." The next evening, as soon as it began to grow dusk, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." At once the hair fell down, and the king's son climbed up by it. Rapunzel was greatly terrified when she saw that a man had come into her, for she had never seen one before. She shrank back in fear, but the king's son spoke to her gently and told her how her singing had entered into his heart, so that he had no peace until he had seen her herself. Then Rapunzel forgot her terror. She listened to his words, and as she looked at him and heard him speak so kindly, her fear passed away. When he asked her if she would take him for her husband, she thought to herself, "I certainly like him much better than old Mother Gothel." And she put her hand into his hand and said that she would willingly go with him. But she added, "I do not know how I shall get out of this tower. When thou comest, bring each time a silken rope, and I will weave it into a ladder. When it is ready, I will climb down by it, and thou shalt take me away upon thy horse." They agreed that he should come to her every evening, for the old woman came in the daytime. Thus the king's son visited Rapunzel often, and each time he brought a silken rope, which she wove patiently thread by thread. So it went on for some time, and the witch knew nothing of all this. But one day Rapunzel said to her unwittingly Mother Gothel, "How is it that you climb up here so slowly, and the king's son is with me in a moment?" "O wicked child," cried the witch, "what is this that I hear? I thought I had hidden thee from all the world, and thou hast betrayed me." In her anger, she seized Rapunzel by her beautiful hair and struck her several times with her left hand. Then she grasped a pair of shears in her right snip-snap, and the long golden locks lay upon the ground. And she was so hard-hearted that she took Rapunzel and carried her away into a waste and desert place, where she left her to live in great sorrow and misery. The same day in the evening, the witch went back to the tower and fastened the severed hair to the window hasp. When the king's son came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," the hair was let down, and he climbed up by it. But instead of his dearest Rapunzel, he found the witch standing before him with wicked and glittering eyes. "Aha!" cried she, mocking him. "You came for your darling, but the sweet bird sits no longer in the nest and sings no more. The cat has got her and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will see her no more." The king's son was beside himself with grief. In his despair, he sprang from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns upon which he fell pierced his eyes, and he became blind. Thus he wandered sightless through the wood, eating nothing but roots and berries, and doing nothing but lament and weep for the loss of his dearest wife. For several years he wandered in this manner, until at last he came to the desert place where Rapunzel lived in great misery. Together with the twin children, she had borne a boy and a girl. As he drew near, he heard a voice which he thought he knew, and when he reached the place from which it came, Rapunzel recognized him and fell upon his neck and wept. And when her tears touched his eyes, they became clear again, and he could see with them as well as ever. Then he took Rapunzel with her children and led them to his kingdom, where he was received with great joy. And there they lived long and happily, and remembered their sorrows no more. Straw, coal, and bean. An old woman once lived in a small village. One day she gathered together a serving of beans and wished to cook them for her meal. She made a fire upon her hearth, and in order that it might burn more quickly, she lit it with a handful of straw. The flames crackled and rose, and the woman began to pour the beans into the pot. But one bean slipped unnoticed from her hand, fell upon the floor, and came to rest beside a piece of straw that lay there. Not long afterward, as the fire burned brightly, a glowing coal leaped out of the fireplace and landed near the bean and the straw. Thus it happened that these three found themselves together upon the hearth, each of them having escaped a fate that would surely have destroyed them. The straw spoke first and said, "Dear friends, where do you come from, and how is it that you are here?" The coal answered, "I have jumped from the fire to my good fortune. Had I not forced my way out, I should have burned to ashes and perished." Then the bean said, "I too have saved my skin. If the old woman had cast me into the pot, I should have been cooked to mush just like all my companions." "Would my fate have been any better?" said the straw. "The old woman seized my brothers by the handful and sent them up in fire and smoke. 60 at once were destroyed, but I slipped through her fingers and escaped." They stood together for a moment, thinking upon the danger they had passed through. Then the coal said, "What shall we do now? Since we have so fortunately escaped death," replied the bean, "it seems best that we should keep together as comrades. Let us leave this place so that no new misfortune may befall us, and make our way to another land." The straw and the coal agreed, and they set out on their journey together. They went on for a while until they came to a small brook. The water flowed swiftly, and there was neither bridge nor plank by which they could cross. They stood upon the bank and did not know what was to be done. Then the straw, who was quick of wit, said, "I have a good idea. I will stretch myself across the brook, and you may walk over me as upon a bridge." Without delay, the straw laid himself from one bank to the other. The coal, who was a hot-headed fellow and acted without much thought, stepped boldly upon the straw bridge. But when he reached the middle and heard the water rushing beneath him, fear seized his heart, He stopped trembling and did not dare to go forward or turn back. At that moment, the straw caught fire from the heat of the coal, broke in two, and fell into the brook. The coal slid after him into the water, where he hissed loudly, gave up the ghost, and was seen no more. The bean, who had remained cautiously behind upon the bank, witnessed all this and could not restrain himself. He burst into loud laughter, and laughed so long and so violently that at last his side split and he fell apart. Now the bean too would have died had not a wandering tailor been resting by the brook. He had a compassionate heart, and when he saw what had happened, he took out a needle and thread and sewed the bean back together again. The bean thanked him most kindly for his help, but because the tailor had used black thread from that time onward, all beans have borne a black seam. The Frog King, or Iron Henry. In the old times, when it was still of some use to wish for the thing one wanted, there lived a king whose daughters were all fair and beautiful. Yet the youngest was so exceedingly lovely that even the son, who had seen so much, wondered each time he shone upon her face. Wherever she went, light seemed to follow her, and her beauty was spoken of far beyond the borders of the kingdom. Near the royal castle there lay a great dark wood, and in the midst of that wood, beneath an old linden tree, there was a deep well. When the day was hot, the king's youngest daughter would go out into the wood and sit by the brink of the cool well, for she loved the quiet of the place. And when the time seemed long to her, she would take a golden ball from her pocket, throw it up into the air, and catch it again as it fell. This was her favorite pastime, and she could spend many hours at it without growing weary. One day it happened that the golden ball, instead of falling back into the maiden's little hand, which had sent it aloft, struck the ground near the edge of the well and rolled straight in. The king's daughter followed it with her eyes as it sank, but the well was so deep that the bottom could not be seen. Then her joy vanished at once, and she began to weep. She wept, and her tears fell into the well as though they would never cease. As she sat there lamenting her loss, she suddenly heard a voice saying, "What ails thee, king's daughter? Thy tears would melt a heart of stone." She looked around in wonder, but saw nothing. Then she looked down into the water, and there she saw a frog stretching his thick, ugly head above the surface. "Oh, is it you, old waddler?" said she. "I weep because my golden ball has fallen into the well." "Never mind," answered the frog. "Do not weep. I can help you. But what will you give me if I fetch up your ball again?" The king's daughter thought for a moment, and then answered quickly, "Whatever you like, dear frog. I will give you any of my clothes, my pearls and jewels, or even the golden crown that I wear." The frog shook his head and said, "Thy clothes, thy pearls and jewels, and thy golden crown are not for me. But if thou wouldst love me, and have me for thy companion and playfellow, and let me sit by thee at table, and eat from thy plate, and drink from thy cup, and sleep in thy little bed, if thou wouldst promise me all this, then would I dive down below the water, and fetch thee thy golden ball again." The king's daughter was frightened by such words, and yet she thought to herself, "What nonsense the frog talks!" For she believed that he could do nothing but sit in the water and croak with the other frogs, and that he could never truly be the companion of a human being. And so she said aloud, "Oh yes, I will promise it all, whatever you want, if you will only get me my ball again." But scarcely had she spoken when the frog drew his head under the water and sank down out of sight. After a little while, he came up again, holding the golden ball in his mouth. He threw it upon the grass, and the king's daughter was beside herself with joy. She caught up her pretty plaything at once and ran off toward home as fast as she could. "Stop, stop!" cried the frog. "Take me with you. I cannot run as fast as you." But it was of no use. Croak, croak, as loudly as he might, she would not listen to him. She hurried on her way, and very soon forgot all about the poor frog, who was forced to return sadly to his well. The next day, when the king's daughter was sitting at table with the king, and all the court eating from her golden plate, there came something pitter-patter up the marble stairs. Then there was a knock at the door, and a voice cried, "Youngest king's daughter, let me in." She rose from her seat and ran to see who it could be. But when she opened the door, there sat the frog looking up at her with his round eyes. She shut the door hastily and went back to her place, her heart beating fast within her breast. The king noticed her fear and said, "My child, what are you afraid of? Is there a giant standing at the door ready to carry you away?" "Oh no," answered she, "no giant, but a horrid frog." "And what does the frog want?" asked the king. "Oh, dear father," she said, "when I was sitting by the well yesterday playing with my golden ball, it fell into the water. While I was crying for the loss of it, the frog came and fetched it again for me, on condition that I should let him be my companion. I never thought that he could leave the water and follow me here, but now he is outside and wants to come in." Even as she spoke, they heard the frog knocking again and calling, "Youngest king's daughter, open to me by the well water." "What promised you me? Youngest king's daughter, now open to me." The king listened gravely and then said, "That which thou hast promised in thy time of necessity must thou now perform. Go and let him in." With great unwillingness, the king's daughter rose and opened the door. The frog hopped in and followed her step by step until she reached her chair. There he stopped and cried, "Lift me up to sit by you." She delayed, but when the king commanded her, she lifted the frog onto the chair beside her. When the frog was seated beside the king's daughter, he looked at her golden plate and said, "Now push your plate a little nearer, so that we may eat together." She did as she was told, though everyone at the table could see how unwilling she was, and how every movement filled her with disgust. The frog, however, ate heartily, and seemed well pleased, while each morsel she swallowed appeared to stick in her throat. When the meal was finished, the frog said, "I have eaten my fill and am tired. Now carry me to your room and make ready your silken bed, for we will lie down and go to sleep." At these words, the king's daughter began to weep. She was afraid of the cold frog and shuddered at the thought of letting him lie in her clean and beautiful bed. But the king grew angry and said to her, "That which thou hast promised in thy time of necessity must thou now perform." And so she dared not disobey him. With great reluctance, she picked up the frog with her finger and thumb and carried him upstairs. She put him in a corner of the room and lay down upon her bed, hoping that he would remain where he was. But the frog crept closer and closer, and at last he said, "I am tired and want to sleep as much as you. Lift me up, or I will tell your father." Then the king's daughter was beside herself with rage. In her anger, she seized the frog and threw him with all her strength against the wall, crying, "Now will you be quiet, you horrid frog?" But as he fell to the ground, he was no frog any longer. In his place stood a prince with beautiful and kindly eyes. His garment shone, and his bearing was noble, and he spoke to her gently, so that her fear vanished at once. He told her that a wicked witch had bound him by her spells, and that no one but she alone could have released him from them. And with her father's consent, he said they should now become bride and bridegroom. The king was well pleased when he heard this, and the marriage was agreed upon at once. The prince further told how he must now return to his own kingdom, and that the king's daughter should go with him as his wife. Soon afterward, there came to the door a splendid carriage drawn by 8 white horses. They wore white plumes upon their heads and golden harness upon their bodies, and the carriage itself shone as though it were made of gold. Behind the carriage stood faithful Henry, the servant of the young prince. Faithful Henry had suffered great sorrow when his master had been turned into a frog. His grief had been so heavy that he had been forced to bind 3 iron bands around his heart, lest it should break with pain and longing. Now that his master was released and restored to his true form, his joy was beyond measure. When the bride and bridegroom had taken their places in the carriage, and faithful Henry had mounted behind, they set out upon the road to the prince's kingdom. They had not gone far when a loud cracking sound was heard from behind, as if something had broken. The prince turned round in alarm and cried, "Henry, the wheel must be breaking." "No, Lord," answered faithful Henry, "the wheel does not break. 'Tis the band round my heart, which to lessen its ache, when I grieved for your sake, I bound round my heart." They drove on a little farther, and again there was the same sound. Once more the prince thought the carriage was breaking, and called out anxiously. But it was only another of the iron bands that had burst apart from Henry's heart, for his joy was now so great that it could no longer be held. And yet once again there came the same sound, and once again the prince feared for the carriage. But it was the third and last iron band that broke, for faithful Henry's heart was now wholly free and full of happiness at his master's deliverance. Thus they journeyed on together, the joy of the one matching the faithfulness of the other, until they reached the prince's kingdom. There they were received with great rejoicing, and lived long and happily together, ruling their people in peace. And faithful Henry remained ever near his master, content at last, for the burden upon his heart was gone. The brother and sister. The brother took his sister by the hand and said to her, "Since our mother died, we have had no good days. Our stepmother beats us every day, and if we go near her, she kicks us away. We have nothing to eat but hard crusts of bread that are left over, and even the dog beneath the table fares better than we do, for he is given a good piece now and then. If our mother only knew how we suffer, how she would pity us. Come, let us go together out into the wide world." The sister looked at her brother with sorrowful eyes, for she knew that every word he spoke was true. Yet she trembled at the thought of leaving their home, miserable as it was. Still, there was no hope left for them there, so she pressed his hand and answered, "Yes, dear brother, let us go, for we can no longer stay." they went away together and journeyed the whole day through fields and meadows and stony places. The sun burned hot upon them, and their feet grew weary, yet they did not turn back. And when the rain fell from the sky, the sister said softly, "The heavens and we are weeping together." Thus they wandered on, comforted only by each other's presence. When evening came, they reached a great forest, dark and thick, where the tall trees stood so close together that the light could scarcely pass between them. They were weak with hunger and weariness and could go no farther. At last they climbed up into a high tree where they hoped to be safe from wild beasts, and there they fell asleep, holding fast to one another. The next morning when they awoke, the sun was already high in the heavens and shone brightly through the leaves. The sister looked about her in wonder, for the forest seemed quieter and more solemn by day than it had in the night. Then the brother said, "Sister, I am thirsty. If I only knew where to find a brook that I might go and drink, I almost think that I hear one rushing." He climbed down from the tree and led his sister by the hand, and together they went in search of water. But their wicked stepmother, who was a witch, had known well enough that the children had fled, and she had followed them secretly, as witches know how to do. In her malice, she laid a spell upon all the brooks in the forest, so that whoever drank from them would be changed into a wild beast. Before long, they came to a little stream that flowed gently over its pebbles, sparkling in the light of the sun. The brother was about to stoop and drink when the sister heard how the water murmured as it ran, saying, "He who drinks of me will be a tiger. Who drinks of me will be a tiger." At once the sister cried out, "Pray, dear brother, do not drink, or you will be turned into a fierce tiger and tear me in pieces." The brother stepped back, though his thirst tormented him greatly, and said, "I will wait until we come to the next brook." And so they went on farther into the forest. Soon they found a second stream, which flowed more swiftly than the first. But again the sister listened, and she heard the water say, "He who drinks of me will be a wolf. Who drinks of me will be a wolf." Then the sister cried again, "Pray, dear brother, do not drink, or you will be changed into a wolf and eat me up." The brother sighed deeply and answered, "I will wait still longer until we find another brook. But then I must drink whatever you may say, for my thirst is too great." They walked on with heavy hearts, and at last they came to a third brook. It ran quietly and clearly through the grass, and the brother hurried toward it, for his strength was almost gone. But the sister heard its murmur and understood its words, which said, "He who drinks of me will be a fawn. Who drinks of me will be a fawn." Then she threw herself before her brother and cried, "Oh, my brother, I beg you, do not drink, or you will be turned into a fawn and run away from me." But his thirst was so great that he scarcely heard her. He knelt down by the brook and drank of the clear water, and as the first drops touched his lips, he was changed into a fawn. The sister wept bitterly over her poor brother, and the little fawn wept also, for he understood her sorrow and could not speak to comfort her. He stayed close beside her, trembling and afraid. At last the maiden dried her tears and said, "Be comforted, dear fawn. I will never leave you." She untied her golden girdle and bound it gently around the fawn's neck, and then she gathered rushes and plaited a soft cord which she fastened to him. Thus she led him deeper into the forest, where no one could find them. After they had gone a long, long way, they came at last to a little house that stood hidden among the trees. The sister looked inside and found that it was empty. "Here we might live," she said, "for no one dwells in this place." She fetched leaves and moss and made a soft bed for the fawn. Every morning she went out to gather roots, berries, and nuts for herself and fresh grass for the fawn. He ate from her hand and frolicked about her with joy, for he loved her dearly. At night, when the sister was tired and had said her prayers, she laid her head upon the fawn's back, which served her as a pillow, and fell softly asleep. And if only the brother could have regained his own shape, their life would have been full of happiness. Thus they lived alone in the wilderness for a long while, unknown to the world and content with one another. Now it happened that the king of that country proclaimed a great hunt in the forest. Early in the morning, the horns were blown, the dogs barked loudly, and the voices of the huntsmen rang through the wood. The sound of it reached even to the lonely dwelling where the sister lived with the fawn. And when the fawn heard it, his heart leapt within him. He could no longer stand still, but bounded restlessly about the room. "Oh," said he to his sister, "do let me go to the hunt. I cannot stay here any longer." And he begged her so earnestly that at last she gave way. "But mind," said she to him, "come back to me in the evening. I must lock my door against the wild hunters, and so that I may know you, you must knock and say, 'Little sister, let me in.' Unless I hear those words, I will not open the door." The fawn promised faithfully and sprang away into the forest, feeling glad and free in the open air. The king and his huntsmen soon saw the beautiful creature with its slender limbs and bright eyes, and they began at once to pursue it. But they could not come near him, for whenever they thought they had surely surrounded him, he sprang lightly over the bushes and disappeared among the trees. Thus the chase lasted the whole day, and when evening fell, the fawn remembered his sister's words. He ran back to the little house, knocked softly, and called out, "Little sister, let me in." Then the door was opened to him, and he lay down upon his soft bed and rested through the night. The next morning, the hunt began again. When the fawn heard the horns and the joyful shouts, he could rest no longer. "Little sister," he said, "let me out. I must go once more." Though she felt a great fear in her heart, she unlocked the door and let him go, reminding him again of his promise. When the king saw the fawn with the golden collar about his neck, he desired above all things to take him alive, and ordered the hunters to follow him carefully and do him no harm. All day long they chased him, until at last one of the huntsmen wounded his foot a little so that he was forced to limp and could no longer run swiftly. A hunter followed him quietly and saw how the fawn came to the little house, knocked and called, "Little sister, let me in," and how the door was opened and shut again at once. The hunter marked this well and told the king all that he had seen and heard. "Tomorrow," said the king, "we will hunt again." But the sister was filled with terror when she saw that her dear fawn was wounded. She washed his foot, laid cool leaves upon it, and said, "Lie down and rest, dear fawn, that you may soon be well." The wound was slight, and by morning the fawn felt scarcely any pain. Yet when he heard the sound of the hunt again, he begged her to let him go. The sister wept and said, "I know you will be killed, and I shall be left alone in the forest, forsaken by all the world. I cannot let you go." "Then I shall die here of longing," answered the fawn, "for when I hear the horns, it is as though my heart would burst." Seeing that there was no help for it, the sister opened the door with a heavy heart, and the fawn bounded away joyfully into the forest. When the king saw him, he said to the huntsman, "Follow him until nightfall, but do him no harm." And when the sun had gone down, the king himself went to the little house in the wood. He knocked at the door and cried, "Little sister, let me in." The door opened, and the king entered. There stood a maiden so beautiful that he had never seen her equal. She cried out in terror when she saw, instead of the fawn, a man with a golden crown upon his head. But the king spoke kindly to her and took her by the hand, and his gentle manner soon calmed her fear. "Will you go with me to my castle," said he, "and be my dear wife?" "Oh, yes," answered the maiden, "but the fawn must come with me. I cannot leave him." "He shall remain with you as long as you live," said the king, "and shall lack nothing." Then the fawn came bounding in, and the sister tied the cord of rushes to him and led him out of the little house. The king lifted the maiden upon his horse and carried her to his castle, where the wedding was celebrated with great pomp. Thus the poor sister became a queen, and for a long while they lived together in happiness. The fawn was well cared for and cherished, and he ran freely about the castle garden. Now the wicked stepmother, who was the cause of all the children's sorrow, believed that the sister had long since been devoured by wild beasts, and that the brother, in the form of a fawn, had been slain by the hunters. But when she heard that they were living in such happiness, envy and jealousy awoke in her heart and gave her no rest. Her own daughter, who was ugly and had but one eye, complained bitterly and said, "I never had the chance of being a queen." "Be quiet," said the old woman. "When the time comes, I shall be ready." After a while, the queen brought a beautiful baby boy into the world. On that very day, the king was out hunting. Then the wicked witch took the form of the chambermaid and went into the room where the queen lay. "Come," said she, "the bath is ready. It will give you new strength." Her daughter stood near at hand, and together they carried the weak queen into the bathroom. There they had made a great fire, and when they had shut her in, they left her there so that the beautiful young queen was suffocated. Then the old woman took her own daughter, put a cap upon her head, laid her in the queen's bed, and gave her the queen's form and appearance, though she could not restore the missing eye. Therefore she laid her on the side where the king could not see it. In the evening, when the king returned and heard that a son had been born to him, he rejoiced greatly and wished to go at once to his wife's bedside. But the old woman cried hastily, "For your life, do not draw back the curtains. She must be kept quiet." So the king went away and never knew that a false queen lay in the bed. Now when midnight came and all the people in the castle lay asleep, the nurse who sat alone in the nursery beside the cradle saw the door softly open. In stepped the queen, pale and gentle, just as she had been in life. She took the child from the cradle, laid it upon her bosom, and fed it. Then she shook out the little pillow, placed the child back again, and covered it carefully. Nor did she forget the fawn, for she went to the corner where it lay and stroked its back tenderly. After that, she passed silently out of the door, and no sound was heard. The nurse sat trembling, for she had seen the queen clearly, yet could not understand what had happened. In the morning, she asked the watchmen whether anyone had entered the castle during the night, but they answered that they had seen no one. On the next night, and the night after that, the queen came again in the same manner. Each time she tended the child with loving care, smoothed its pillow, and stroked the fawn. She spoke no word, and always vanished as quietly as she had come. The nurse watched her in fear and wonder, but did not dare speak of it to anyone. After a while, the queen found voice, and one night she said softly, "My child, my fawn, twice more I come to see, twice more I come, and then the end must be." The nurse's heart beat fast when she heard these words, but she kept silence. As soon as the queen had disappeared, however, she went to the king and told him all that she had seen and heard. "Ah, heaven!" cried the king, "what is this tomorrow night? I will watch myself beside the child." So in the evening he went into the nursery and hid himself behind the curtain. At midnight the door opened, and the queen appeared once more. She took the child, fed it, and tended the fawn as before, and then she said, "My child, my fawn, once more I come to see. Once more I come, and then the end must be." The king stood still and did not speak, for he feared she might vanish. When she was gone, he remained wakeful and full of sorrowful thoughts. On the following night he watched again, and at midnight the queen came for the last time. She spoke, "My child, my fawn, this once I come to see. This once I come, and now the end must be." When she had finished her tender care, the king could restrain himself no longer. He stepped forward and cried, "You are no other than my dear wife." Then she answered gently, "Yes, I am your dear wife." And at that moment, by the grace of heaven, life returned to her. Her color came back, her strength was restored, and she stood before him, living and well as before. She then told him all that had happened, how the wicked stepmother and her daughter had deceived her, how they had suffocated her in the bathroom, and how the false queen had taken her place. The king was filled with anger and sorrow, and at once commanded that justice be done. The false queen and the wicked witch were brought before judgment. Sentence was passed upon them according to their evil deeds. The witch was burned and ended miserably, and her daughter was driven out into the forest, where she was devoured by wild beasts. As soon as the witch's body was reduced to ashes, the spell that bound the brother was broken. The fawn trembled, and before all eyes was changed back into a handsome young man. The brother and sister fell into each other's arms and wept for joy, for now all their sorrow was at an end. From that time on, they lived together in peace and happiness. The brother remained with his sister at the court, honored and loved, and the queen ruled wisely beside the king. And after all the trials they had endured, their days were filled with contentment until the end. The good bargain. There was once a peasant who lived quietly by his labor and trusted his own understanding above all things. One day he drove his cow to the fair and sold her for 7 thalers. He put the money carefully into his pocket and set out on the road home well content, for he believed that he had made a good bargain. On his way, he had to pass by a pond. Even from a distance, he heard the frog sitting in the water and crying loudly, "Ike, Ike, Ike, Ike." When the peasant heard this, he stopped and listened. "Well," said he to himself, "they are talking without rhyme or reason. It is 7 that I have received, not 8. When he came nearer to the water, the frog still cried, "Ike, Ike, Ike, Ike." This displeased him greatly, for he was not used to being contradicted. "Stupid animals that you are," cried he. "Don't you know better than that? It is 7 thalers and not 8. The frogs, however, went on crying just as before and paid no heed to his words. Then the peasant grew angry and said, "If you will not believe me, I will count it out to you." He took the money from his pocket and counted the 7 thalers one by one, reckoning carefully 24 groschen to each thaler. But the frogs neither listened nor understood, and still cried, "Ike, Ike, Ike, Ike." "What," shouted the peasant, "since you are determined to know better than I, count it yourselves." And with that, he threw all the money into the pond. He stood there and waited, for he believed that the frogs would now understand and bring him his money back again. But the frogs only kept up their cry, and not a single thaler was thrown out of the water. He waited until evening came on, and when no money appeared, he abused the frogs and called them water splashers, thick heads, and goggle eyes. At last he went home quite angry, while the frogs still cried after him, "Ike, Ike, Ike, Ike." After a while, the peasant bought another cow. He killed her and said to himself that if he sold the meat well, he might gain as much as the 2 cows together were worth, and besides that, he would still have the skin. This calculation pleased him mightily, and he set out with the meat toward the town. When he reached the town gate, a great troop of dogs were gathered together there, and at the head of them was a large greyhound. As soon as he saw the meat, the greyhound jumped at it, sniffed at it, and barked loudly, "Wow, wow, wow." "There now," said the peasant, "I know quite well what thou art saying. Thou wantest some of the meat, but I should fare badly if I were to give it to thee." The dog, however, barked nothing, but "Wow, wow, wow." "Wilt thou promise not to devour it all?" asked the peasant. "And wilt thou go bail for thy companions?" "Wow, wow, wow," answered the dog. "Well then," said the peasant, "if thou insistest upon it, I will leave it here for thee. I know thee well, and know who is thy master. But mark this, I must have my money in 3 days, or it will go ill with thee. Thou must just bring it out to me." With that, he laid the meat down and turned back. The dogs fell upon it at once and barked loudly, "Wow, wow." As the peasant walked away, he heard them from afar and said to himself, "They all want some of it, but the big one is responsible to me for it." When 3 days had passed, the peasant thought, "Tonight my money will be in my pocket," and he was quite delighted. But no one came. He waited, and still no one came. Then he said, "There is no trust in anyone now," and at last he lost patience and went into the town to the butcher. He demanded his money and said that the great dog had brought him the whole of the slaughtered cow 3 days before. The butcher thought he was jesting, but the peasant grew angry and insisted upon it. Then the butcher snatched up a broomstick and drove him out of the shop. "Wait a while," said the peasant as he went away. "There is still some justice in the world." With that, he went to the royal palace and begged for an audience. He was led before the king, who sat there with his daughter. The king asked him what injury he had suffered. "Alas," said the peasant, "the frogs and the dogs have taken from me what is mine, and the butcher has paid me for it with blows." And he related everything from beginning to end, just as it had happened. When the king's daughter heard this, she began to laugh heartily, for never in her life had she heard such a tale. The king looked at the peasant and said, "I cannot give thee justice in this matter, but thou shalt have my daughter to wife. I have promised her to the man who could make her laugh, and thou hast done so." "Oh," answered the peasant, "I will not have her. I have a wife already, and she is one too many for me. When I go home, it is just as bad as if I had a wife standing in every corner." When the peasant spoke thus, the king grew angry and said, "Thou art a boor." "Ah, Lord King," replied the peasant calmly, "what can you expect from an ox but beef?" At these words, the king was silent for a moment, for he could not deny that there was some sense in them, though it was not spoken with much politeness. Then he said, "Enough. Thou shalt not have my daughter, but thou shalt have another reward. Go thy way now, and come back again in 3 days' time. Then 500 shall be counted out to thee in full." The peasant went out of the palace quite content, for he thought to himself that 500 was a great sum, and that fortune had at last begun to smile upon him. As he passed through the gate, the sentry who stood there said to him, "Thou hast made the king's daughter laugh. Thou wilt surely receive something good." "Yes," answered the peasant, "that is what I think too. 500 are to be counted out to me." "Hear me," said the soldier, lowering his voice. "Give me some of it. What canst thou do with so much money?" The peasant considered this and said, "As it is thou who askest, thou shalt have 200. Present thyself in 3 days before the king, and let it be paid to thee." The soldier was well pleased with this promise, and let the peasant go his way. Now a Jew had been standing near and had heard all that passed between them. He ran after the peasant, seized him by the coat, and cried, "Oh, what luck! What fortune! I will change it for thee. I will change it into small coins. What dost thou want with great thalers?" Jew said, "The peasant 300 canst thou have. Give it to me at once in coin, and in 3 days thou shalt be paid by the king." The Jew was delighted, for he thought he saw a great profit before him. He quickly brought the money, but it was in bad groschen, 3 of which were worth no more than 2 good ones. The peasant took them without counting, for he trusted that all money was money, and went home quite satisfied. When 3 days had passed, the peasant presented himself before the king as he had been commanded. The king looked at him and said, "Pull his coat off, and let the 500 be counted out to him." "Ah," cried the peasant, "they no longer belong to me. 200 I gave to the sentinel, and 300 the Jew has already changed for me. By rights, nothing at all belongs to me." At that moment, the soldier entered and claimed his 200, and the Jew came also, and demanded the 300 that were due to him. Then the king understood how the matter stood, and ordered that the reward should be paid out in another way. He commanded that the blows should be counted out instead of the money. The soldier bore them patiently and said nothing, for he was already accustomed to such treatment. But the Jew cried loudly, "Alas, alas! Are these the heavy thalers?" and lamented bitterly. When the king saw this, he could not help laughing, and all his anger passed away. He said to the peasant, "Since thou hast already lost thy reward before it fell to thy lot, I will give thee something in its place. Go into my treasure chamber and take for thyself as much money as thou wilt." The peasant did not need to be told twice. He went quickly into the treasure chamber and stuffed into his big pockets whatever would go in. He did not count, nor did he measure, but took handful after handful until his pockets were full and would hold no more. Afterward, he went to an inn and began to count out his money. As he did so, he muttered to himself, "That rogue of a king has cheated me after all. Why could he not have given me the money himself? Then I should have known exactly what I had. How can I tell now whether what I have taken is right or not?" The Jew, who had crept after him and overheard these words, said to himself, "That man is speaking disrespectfully of our lord the king. I will go and inform against him, and then I shall get a reward, and he will be punished as well." He ran at once to the palace and told the king what the peasant had said. The king fell into a great passion and commanded the Jew to bring the offender before him at once. The Jew hastened to the peasant and said, "Thou must go instantly to the king, just as thou art." "I know better than that," replied the peasant. "I shall have a new coat made first. Dost thou think that a man with so much money in his pockets should appear before the king in such a ragged old coat?" When the Jew saw that the peasant would not stir without a new coat, and feared that if the king's anger cooled, he would lose both his reward and the peasant his punishment, he said, "Out of pure friendship, I will lend thee a coat for the short time. What will people not do for love?" The peasant was contented with this, put on the Jew's coat, and went with him to the king. When they stood before the king, the Jew accused the peasant of evil speaking. The king reproached him and asked what he had to say in his defense. "Ah," said the peasant, "what a Jew says is always false. No true word ever comes out of his mouth. That rascal there is quite capable of saying that I have his coat on." "What?" cried the Jew. "Is the coat not mine? Did I not lend it to thee out of pure friendship, that thou mightest appear properly before the king?" When the king heard this, he said, "The Jew has assuredly deceived one of us, either myself or the peasant." And once more he ordered something to be counted out in hard thalers. This time the peasant went away in the good coat, with good money in his pocket, and returned home well pleased. As he walked along, he said to himself, "This time I have hit it." The Fisherman and His Wife. There was once a fisherman who lived with his wife in a poor hovel by the seashore. The hovel stood low upon the sand, so close to the water that the sound of the waves never left it, neither by day nor by night. Wind and salt had eaten into its walls, and the roof was crooked and patched. Inside, the air was heavy and ill-smelling, and there was little light, for the single window was small and often dimmed by damp. The fisherman went out every day with his hook and line. He went out early and returned late, and his life followed the same course each day. He angled and angled, standing or sitting by the water, watching the sea as it shifted before him. Sometimes it lay clear and calm, sometimes dull and clouded, but he waited patiently in all weathers. He did not complain of his lot, nor did he ask for more than what the sea might give him. His wife remained behind in the hovel. She kept what order she could, though there was little to arrange and little to mend. The poverty of their life pressed upon her more heavily than upon her husband. She was weary of the narrow walls, weary of the smell of fish and damp, and weary of the sameness of each day. What the fisherman accepted without question, she endured with growing resentment. One day, the fisherman sat longer than usual by the water. He sat and sat, looking down into the clear sea, which lay smooth and quiet before him. The line hung still, and nothing stirred beneath the surface. At last, without warning, the line was drawn sharply downward as though seized from below. The fisherman pulled it up with care, and when it came to the surface, he saw that he had caught a great flounder, larger and heavier than any fish he had taken before. As he looked at it, the flounder spoke to him in a human voice. "Fisherman," it said, "listen to me. Let me go. I am not a real fish, but an enchanted prince. What good will it do you to keep me? I shall not taste well. Put me back into the water and let me swim away." The fisherman was surprised but not frightened. He was a simple man and did not trouble himself greatly over strange things. He looked at the flounder and answered quietly, "There is no need for so many words. Since you can speak, I would much rather let you swim away." He took the fish from the hook and put it back into the clear water. The flounder sank slowly to the bottom, and as it went, it left behind a long streak of blood which spread through the water and then faded away. The fisherman watched until it disappeared, then gathered his things and went home. When he reached the hovel, his wife was waiting for him. "Well, husband," she said, "have you caught nothing today?" "No," said the fisherman. "That is, I did catch a flounder, but he said he was an enchanted prince, and so I let him go again." She looked at him closely. "Did you wish for nothing?" she asked. "No," he replied. "What should I wish for?" "Oh dear," cried the wife, "it is dreadful always to live in this evil-smelling hovel. You might at least have wished for a little cottage. Go back at once and call the fish. Tell him we want a cottage. I am sure he will give it to us. Go and be quick." The fisherman hesitated. He did not like to trouble the flounder again, for he felt it was not right to ask for more than he had been offered. But his wife would not be satisfied. She reproached him and pressed him until at last he turned back toward the shore. When he reached the sea, it no longer looked as it had before. The water was green and yellow and not nearly so clear. Still, it lay quiet enough. The fisherman stood by the edge and called out, oh man, if man you be, or flounder, flounder in the sea. Such a tiresome wife I've got, for she wants what I do not." The flounder came swimming up and said, "Now then, what does she want?" "She does not wish to live any longer in the hovel," said the fisherman. "She wants a little cottage." "Go home," said the flounder. "She has it already." The fisherman turned back at once. When he reached the place where the hovel had stood, he saw instead a neat little cottage. It was clean and well built, and his wife was sitting on a bench before the door. She rose when she saw him, took him by the hand, and said, "Come in and see if this is not a great improvement." They went inside. There was a small house place, a pretty bedroom, a kitchen, and a larder, all furnished with good and serviceable things. Iron and brass vessels shone upon the shelves, and everything stood in order. At the back was a little yard with fowls and ducks, and beyond it a small garden full of green vegetables and fruit. Look said, "The wife is not that nice." "Yes," said the fisherman, "if this can only last, we shall be very well contented." "We will see about that," she answered. For a week or two, all went well. The fisherman went out each day as before, and the wife moved about her new house with satisfaction. But the feeling did not last. The cottage, which had seemed so fine at first, soon appeared too small. The yard and garden seemed cramped, and she began to look beyond them. One day she said, "Husband, the cottage is really too confined. The yard and garden are far too small. I think the flounder had better get us a larger house. I should like very much to live in a large stone castle. Go to your fish and tell him so." "Oh, my dear wife," said the fisherman, "the cottage is good enough. What do we want with a castle?" "We want one," she replied. "Go along. The flounder can give us one." "The flounder gave us the cottage," said the fisherman. "I do not like to go to him again. He may be angry." "Go along," said the wife. "He might just as well give us one thing as another. Do as I say." The fisherman felt reluctant and unwilling, and as he went, he said to himself, "It is not the right thing to do." Nevertheless, he went. When he came to the sea, the water was purple, and dark blue and gray and thick, not green and yellow as before. He stood by the shore and said, oh man, if man you be, or flounder, flounder in the sea, such a tiresome wife I've got, for she wants what I do not." "What does she want now?" said the flounder. "She wants to live in a large stone castle," said the fisherman, half frightened. "Go home," said the flounder. "She is already standing before the door." The fisherman turned back, and when he reached home, he saw that in place of the cottage there stood a great stone castle. It rose high and broad with strong walls and wide steps. His wife was standing upon the steps about to go in. She took him by the hand and said, "Let us enter." Inside was a great hall with a marble floor. Servants led them through wide doors, and the passages were hung with tapestry. The rooms were filled with golden chairs and tables, and crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings. The tables were set with fine food and the best wine. At the back of the castle lay a great stable yard, and beyond it a splendid garden with flowers, fruit trees, and a wide pleasance. There, said, "The wife is not this beautiful." "Yes," said the fisherman, "if it will only last, we can live here and be very well contented." "We will see about that," said the wife. And with that, they went to bed. The night passed quietly in the great stone castle. Thick walls shut out the wind, and heavy curtains hung before the windows. The fisherman slept deeply, wearied by the long day and by the strangeness of his new surroundings. His wife, however, awoke before him, as she often did. At the first pale light of dawn, she opened her eyes and lay still, listening. She rose quietly and went to the window. From there she could see far across the land. Fields stretched out below, divided by hedges and paths. Woods lay dark and dense in the distance, and beyond them villages and farms stood scattered like small marks upon the earth. Everything lay calm and orderly beneath the morning sky. It pleased her to see it all, yet the pleasure did not last. She turned back to the bed where her husband lay sleeping and looked at him for a moment. Then she reached out and poked him sharply with her elbow. "Husband," she said, "wake up and look out of the window." He stirred, opened his eyes, and sat up slowly. "What is it?" he asked. "Just look," she said. "Look at all this land. Think how fine it would be if we were king over it all. Go to your fish and tell him we want to be king." The fisherman shook his head at once. "Wife," he said, "what should we want to be king for? I do not want to be king." "If you do not want to be king," she replied, "then I will be king." He frowned and looked uneasy. "Now, wife," he said, "what do you want to be king for? I could not ask such a thing." "You must go all the same," she answered firmly. "I must be king." The fisherman sighed. He felt the same reluctance he had felt before, only stronger. "It is not the right thing to do," he thought. Yet he rose, dressed himself, and went out, for he knew his wife would not let the matter rest. When he came to the sea, it no longer lay as it had the day before. The water was dark gray and thick, and it rushed far inland with a restless sound. A foul smell rose from it, and the fisherman felt troubled in his heart. Still, he stood by the shore and called out, O man, if man you be, or flounder, flounder in the sea, such a tiresome wife I've got, for she wants what I do not." The flounder came swimming up and said, "Now then, what does she want?" "She wants to be king," said the fisherman. "Go home," said the flounder. "She is king already." The fisherman turned back at once. As he approached the castle, he saw that it had grown larger than before. Great towers rose above the walls, and splendid gateways stood open. Heralds stood before the entrance, and soldiers were drawn up in ranks, beating kettle drums and blowing trumpets. He passed through the gates and entered the castle. Everything inside was changed. The halls were broader, the ceilings higher, and the walls gleamed with marble and gold. Heavy curtains hung from tall windows, and the floors shone beneath his feet. At the far end lay the throne room. There sat his wife upon a throne of gold and diamonds. A great golden crown rested upon her head, and the scepter in her hand shone with jewels. On either side stood 6 pages in a row, each one a head shorter than the one before, standing still and silent. The fisherman went up to her slowly and said, "Well, wife, so now you are king." "Yes," she answered, "now I am king." He stood and looked at her for a long while. The sight of her upon the throne filled him with unease rather than joy. At last he said, "Well, wife, this is fine for you to be king. Now there is nothing more to wish for." But his wife did not seem satisfied. She shifted upon her throne and looked away. "I am tired of this already," she said. "Go to your fish and tell him that now I am king, I must be emperor." The fisherman started. "Wife," he said, "what do you want to be emperor for?" "Go and tell the fish," she replied. "I want to be emperor." "Oh dear," said the fisherman, "he cannot do that. There is but one emperor at a time. The fish cannot possibly make anyone emperor." "I'm king," said the wife, "and you are only my husband. Go at once. If he could make me king, he can make me emperor. I will and must be emperor." The fisherman felt his heart sink. As he went out, he said to himself, "This is going too far. The flounder will soon grow weary of this." Yet he went on, for he saw no way to refuse. When he reached the shore, the sea had grown worse still. The water was black and thick. The foam flew upon the waves, and the wind blew sharply. The fisherman trembled, but he stood firm and called out, O man, if man you be, or flounder, flounder in the sea. Such a tiresome wife I've got, for she wants what I do not. What is it now, said the fish. My wife wants to be emperor, said the fisherman. Go home, said the flounder. She is emperor already. The fisherman turned back once more. When he reached the palace, it was greater and more splendid than ever. The walls were adorned with polished marble and alabaster figures, and golden gates stood wide open. Troops were being marshaled before the door, blowing trumpets and beating drums and cymbals. Inside, barons, earls, and dukes waited about like servants. The doors were of bright gold, and the halls seemed to stretch on without end. The fisherman passed through them and came at last to the throne room. There sat his wife upon a throne made of one single piece of gold. It rose high above the floor, and upon her head was a great crown, set with brilliants and carbuncles. In one hand she held the scepter, and in the other the globe. On both sides stood pages arranged in rows according to their size, from the tallest to the smallest, and before her stood nobles in great numbers. The fisherman went up to her and said, Well, wife, so now you are emperor. Yes, she said calmly, now I am emperor. He sat down and looked at her for a long time. The splendor dazzled his eyes, but his heart felt heavy. At last he said, Well now, wife, there is nothing left to be. Now that you are emperor, there can be no more wishes. She did not answer him at once. She sat upright and stared straight ahead. Then she said, What are you saying, husband? I am emperor now, and next I will be pope. Go and tell the fish so. The fisherman stared at her in fear. Wife, he said, you can never be pope. There is but one pope in Christendom. The fish cannot possibly do it. No more words, she said. I must and will be pope. Go along to the fish. The fisherman shook with dread. He went out once more, knowing that the wishes were not yet at an end, and that something worse was still to come. When the fisherman returned from the sea, he found that the palace had changed once more. Where before it had been vast and splendid, it was now surrounded by great churches and high walls, and the sound of bells filled the air. Crowds gathered before the gates, and the fisherman had difficulty making his way through them. Everywhere there was movement, noise, and solemn ceremony. At last he entered the great church. It was lighted with thousands upon thousands of candles, whose flames shone upon marble pillars and gilded walls. The air was heavy with incense, and the space seemed endless. At the far end, raised high above the floor, sat his wife upon a lofty throne. She was clothed in garments of gold, and upon her head she wore 3 crowns, one set upon another, all shining brightly. On either side of her stood long rows of lights from the tallest to the smallest, and before her knelt emperors and kings, bowing low and kissing her foot. The fisherman stood still for a long time and looked at her until his eyes ached from the brightness. At last he said, Well, wife, so now you are pope. Yes, she answered now, I am pope. He waited, hoping she would speak further, but she said nothing. After a while he said again, Now, wife, what is there left to be? You are pope. You can be nothing more. She sat stiff and upright, her face hard and restless. At last she said only, We will see about that. They went to bed. But though the fisherman was worn out and fell asleep at once, his wife could not rest. She tossed and turned her thoughts, never still. Though she had reached the highest power on earth, it did not content her. Her mind reached beyond what she already possessed and sought something greater still. Before dawn, she rose quietly from the bed and went to the window. Outside, the sky was growing pale, and the red light of morning spread across the horizon. She watched as the sun began slowly to rise, lifting itself above the land. As she gazed upon it, a new thought came to her, and her eyes brightened. She turned sharply and went back to the bed. "Husband!" she cried, striking him with her elbow. "Wake up!" The fisherman started and nearly fell from the bed. "What is it?" he asked, still half asleep. "Husband," she said, "go to the fish and tell him I want power over the sun and moon. I want to command them so that they shall rise and set when I bid them." The fisherman stared at her in terror. Then he fell upon his knees before her. "Oh, wife," he cried, "the fish cannot do that. He has made you emperor and pope, but this is too much. Be content, I beg of you." She became wild with impatience. "I can wait no longer," she screamed. "Go at once." The fisherman rose, trembling. Fear seized him so strongly that his knees shook beneath him. Yet he knew he must go, for his wife would not be denied. He hurried from the palace and made his way toward the shore as quickly as he could. As he went, the world around him seemed to fall into chaos. A dreadful storm arose. The wind howled across the land, tearing at trees and roofs, and the clouds raced through the sky. Houses were blown down, mountains trembled, and great rocks crashed into the sea. Thunder rolled without pause. Lightning split the darkness, and the waves rose high like mountains crowned with foam. The fisherman could scarcely keep his footing, but at last he reached the shore. The sea was black as pitch, and it roared so loudly that he could hardly hear his own voice. Still, he stood firm and cried out with all his strength, oh man, if man you be, or flounder, flounder in the sea, such a tiresome wife I've got, for she wants what I do not." The flounder rose from the depths amid the raging water. "Well," said the fish, "what does she want now?" "Oh dear," cried the fisherman, "she wants to command the sun and moon." "Go home," said the flounder. "You will find her in the old hovel." With that, the flounder sank back into the sea. The storm began to lessen as the fisherman turned away, though his heart remained heavy. He walked home, slowly dreading what he would find. When he reached the shore where the palace had stood, he saw that it was gone. The churches and walls had vanished as well. In their place stood the same miserable hovel as before. The roof was crooked, the walls were low, and the smell of damp earth and old fish hung in the air. The fisherman went inside. There sat his wife upon the old bench, dressed once more in her poor clothes. She did not speak, nor did she look at him. And there they sit to this very day. The Pack of Ragamuffins. The cock once said to the hen, "It is now the time when our nuts are ripe. Let us go to the hill together, and for once eat our fill before the squirrel takes them all away." "Yes," replied the hen, "come, we will have some pleasure together." So they went off to the hill, and it was a bright day, clear and cheerful. There they stayed until evening, pecking and eating as much as they wished. Whether it was that they had eaten until they were too fat, or whether pride had entered into their heads, I do not know. But when the time came to go home, they would not walk on foot. Then the cock set himself to work and built a little carriage out of nutshells. When it was ready, the hen seated herself inside and said to the cock, "Thou canst just harness thyself to it." "I like that," said the cock. "I would rather go home on foot than let myself be harnessed like a beast." That was not our bargain. I do not mind being coachman and sitting on the box, but I will not drag it myself. As they stood there disputing, a duck came quacking toward them and cried, "You thieving folk, who bade you come to my nut hill, you shall suffer for it." And with that she ran at the cock with open beak. But the cock was not idle. He fell boldly upon the duck and wounded her so sorely with his spurs that she begged for mercy. At last she agreed, as a punishment, to let herself be harnessed to the carriage. The cock then seated himself proudly upon the box, and they set off at a brisk pace, while he cried, "Duck, go as fast as thou canst." After they had driven a part of the way, they met 2 foot passengers upon the road, a pin and a needle. They cried, "Stop, stop," and said that it would soon be as dark as pitch, and then they could not go a step further. The road was so dirty, they said, and they begged to be allowed to ride in the carriage for a while. They had been at the tailor's public house by the gate and had stayed too long over the beer. As they were thin folk and did not take up much room, the cock allowed them to get in, but they had to promise that they would not step on his feet or on those of the little hen. Late in the evening, they came to an inn. As they did not like to travel farther by night, and as the duck was not strong on her feet and staggered from side to side, they resolved to stay there. The host at first made many objections. His house, he said, was already full, and besides that, he thought they could not be very distinguished guests. But they spoke pleasantly to him and promised that he should have the egg which the little hen had laid on the way, and that he should likewise keep the duck who laid one every day. At last the host was persuaded and said they might stay the night. Then they were well served and feasted and rioted as though they were great lords. They ate and drank to their heart's content and made themselves very merry. Early in the morning, when day was just breaking and everyone in the house was asleep, the cock awoke the hen. He brought the egg, pecked it open, and they ate it together. The shell they threw upon the hearth. After this they went quietly to the needle, which was still asleep, took it by the head, and stuck it into the cushion of the landlord's chair. Then they put the pin into his towel, and without more ado, they flew away over the heath. The duck, who liked to sleep in the open air and had remained in the yard, heard them departing. She was well pleased to be free, found a stream, and swam down it, which was a much quicker way of traveling than being harnessed to a carriage. The host did not rise from his bed until 2 hours later. When he washed himself and took the towel to dry his face, the pin scratched him from one ear to the other and left a red streak behind. "This morning everything attacks my head," said he. Then he went into the kitchen and wanted to light his pipe. But when he stirred the fire on the hearth, the eggshell flew into his eyes. "Now even my eyes are not safe," cried he angrily. At last he sat down in his grandfather's chair to rest. But scarcely had he done so when he sprang up again with a loud cry, for the needle had pricked him far worse than the pin, and not in the head. Now His anger knew no bounds. He suspected at once the guests who had come so late the night before, and when he went to look for them, they were nowhere to be found. Then he made a vow that he would never again take such ragamuffins into his house, for they eat much, pay nothing, and reward kindness with mischievous tricks.